The 2013 Tour de France was the 100th Tour de France. It ran from June 29, 2013 to July 21, 2013, starting in the city of Porto-Vecchio in Corsica, with the island hosting the first 3 stages. Corsica was the only metropolitan region, and Corse-du-Sud and Haute-Corse were the only metropolitan departments, through which the Tour had never previously passed, and the organisers wanted to combine the 100th edition of the Tour with the Tour's first ever visit to Corsica. The opening stage was a standard road stage rather than the more usual individual time trial or prologue. To accommodate the Tour entourage during their stay in Corsica, the organisers chartered the Mega Smeralda cruiser ferry to house members of the organisation, media and others who work on the Tour, and to host press conferences, although the riders stayed in hotels in and around Porto-Vecchio. Stage 1. June 29, 2013 AA Euro Porto-Vecchio to Bastia, 213 km. The first stage of the race was a relatively flat stage on the east coast of Corsica and was expected to end with a sprint finish, with Mark Cavendish looking to claim the sprint and with it the maillot jaune for the overall race leader. The Tour started out inauspiciously for top favourite Chris Froome of Team Sky, as he crashed in the neutralised area before the true beginning of the stage, although he was not hurt. Once the flag came down to signal the true beginning of the stage, 5 riders immediately distinguished themselves as the day's principal escape group: a Eurojar copyright Rami Cousin of Team Europe Car, Euskaltel Euskadi's Juan Jose copyright Labato, Belkin Pro Cycling rider Lars Boom, Juan Antonio Fletcher representing Vacansoleil DCM, and Cyril and Juan from Zuersen. The peloton did not allow them very much lead, as the mostly Omega Pharma quick-step paced main field kept the time gap between 2 and 3 minutes for the majority of the stage. The 4th category Côte de Sotter came at the 45 km mark in the stage, the only climb on the day's Parkers. This meant that the first rider, from the breakaway, over the line would be the first holder of the polka dot jersey. It was Labato who crossed first, beating out Cousin and Boom, and Labato pulled on the climber's jersey at day's end. At that point the breakaway sat up and attempted to rejoin the peloton behind them, since the stage's flat profile meant it was extremely unlikely they could stay away for victory. The time gap got to as little as 39 seconds before eventually getting as high again as 4 minutes. After both the break and the peloton had passed through the feeding station, it was again reduced to 40 seconds. 4 of the riders again looked to sit up and abandon their efforts, but Cousin continued to ride, and eventually so did the whole breakaway group. For these efforts, Cousin was awarded the Daily Combativity Award at stage's end. The time gap then got as large as 4 minutes, allowing the breakaway to contest the intermediate sprint as well. This one went to Boom ahead of Fletcher. A few minutes later, 3 of the Tour's top sprinters, Andra copyright Greipel, Mark Cavendish, and Peter Sagan, sprinted for the points available to them, coming across the line in that very order. The breakaway were at last caught with 37 km remaining in the stage, and the teams set up for the anticipated sprint finale. It was about this time that reports came through of a problem at the finished linear Euro. A bus for the Orica Green Edge team had become stuck under the finishing arch. It was too tall to pass through. It disrupted the electronic timing for the stage, but the more pressing problem was the fact that the finish line was not clear to be covered by the cyclists. Race officials tried to extricate the bus, having no success for several minutes as the riders came nearer and nearer to the finish line. As the peloton passed through the 10 km to go mark, the decision was sent out over race radio for the finish line to be moved to the banner representing 3 km to the finish line. Around this same time, the day's first major crash occurred, sending, among numerous others, 2012 Giro d'Italia champion rider Hizjedal off his bicycle. At approximately 6 km to go the original finish, meaning 3 km to go the revised finished line, teams such as Lotto Belisol and Cannondale had begun their lead-outs. It was at this point that the bus was successfully removed from under the finishing arch, so race officials chose to move the stage finish back to the original finishing line. Also at this point, a crash of tremendous scope thinned the possible stage winners substantially, as sprinters Sagan, Cavendish, and Matthew Goss all either fell themselves or were caught behind the crash. Greipel, for his part, managed to stay upright and at the front of the race through both crashes, but a mechanical issue ended his chances at a stage victory and a yellow jersey. His German compatriot, 24-year-old Marcel Kittel from the Argos Shimano team, was the rider who profited from the day's chaos and took stage honours, with the yellow, green, and white jerseys to go with it. No time gaps were taken on the Stagia. All 197 other riders in the field were given the same time as Kittel. Along with sprinters who missed out on the possibility at a stage win, some overall contenders and noteworthy stage hunters also crashed. Alberto Contador crashed, and while his injuries were not severe enough to force him to retire from the race, he did express concern that they may keep him from being able to ride an optimal position for the upcoming team time trial. Tony Martin and Ted King sustained perhaps the worst injuries of anyone. Martin sustained a concussion and a lung contusion to go along with soft tissue damage and a deep shoulder wound, and King suffered a badly bruised and possibly broken shoulder. Tejay van Garderen, Philippe Gilbert, Gert Steedmans, Janis Brocovia, Tony Galopian, and Murilo Fischer all also crashed. Geraint Thomas also crashed, suffering a hairline fracture to his pelvis in the incident. After the stage, Cavendish, Lotto Belisle rider Greg Henderson, and FDJFR team boss Marc Madiot all expressed their displeasure with race officials for moving the finish back to the original line while the teams were at sprint speed racing for the supposed finish at the 3 km banner. Henderson's criticisms focused on the effects the rapid changes had on the competitive aspect of the race, while Cavendish and Madiot were more concerned with how they affected rider safety. Orica Green Edge were fined £2,000 for not respecting the timetable put in place for auxiliary team vehicles arriving at the stage finish as a result of the incident. For his part, stage winner Kittel claimed not to have heard the instructions over race radio for the revised finish at the 3 km banner, which would seem to have played a part in his being focused to ride hard for the original finish line and take the day's honours. Stage 2. June 30, 2013 AA Euro Bastia to Ajaccio, 156 km, the tour crossed the island to Ajaccio on the west coast, with 4 ranked climbs including the Category 2 Col de Visavona, after 95 km and a Category 3 climb 12 km before the finish. The day started with an opening attack within the opening kilometre and the formation of the day's breakaway by the 6 km mark. The break consisted of Ruba copyright NPAR copyright Res of Euskaltel-Euskadi, Belkin Pro Cycling's Lars Boom, Team Europe car rider David Villeur, and Bull Kadri for Ag Tour La Mondiale and expanded their lead to 3 minutes in the first hour of racing. Boom crossed the intermediate sprint point ahead of his breakaway compatriots, while Andra copyright Greipel lead the peloton across the same point, beating Cannondale's Peter Sagan. The 4 breakaway riders started the climb of the Col de Bellegranaggio with a 1 foot 50 inches advantage that was cut to a 1 foot 00 advantage at the summit of the climb. Villeur and Kadri broke away from their companions at the start of the second climb while Villeur's teammate Thomas Voeckler attacked from the peloton, but was quickly brought back. At this point, a gruppetto was forming which included the yellow jersey Marcel Kittel as well as the other top sprinters in the Tour. Pierre Roland attacked from the peloton and was followed by Zoeson's Bryce Villou. Roland passed the breakaway riders and crossed the summit first, but was caught by the peloton on the Col de Visavona after a concerted effort from FDJFR and Team Sky. On the final climb of the day, separate attacks were made by Team Europe cars Cyril Gautier, Chris Froome, and Juan Antonio Flutra of Vacansoleil DCM. Each of which was unsuccessful. With 7 km to go, Sylvain Chavanel attacked and was joined by Radio Shack Leopards Jan Bakelants, Euskaltel-Euskadi rider Gorka Zaguirre, Manuel Mori for Lambre Merida, Astana's Jacob Fuglsang, and Flutra. The leading peloton picked off members of the breakaway one by one, until only Bakelants remained. Bakelants finished across the line a second in front of Sagan, earning himself his first Tour stage victory in the yellow jersey. Stage 3. July 1, 2013 AA Euro Ajaccio to Calvi, 145.5 km, the third and final day on Corsica saw the race return northwards again along the rugged west coast with several small climbs including the short but steep climb of the Category 2 Col de Marcelino, 13 km before the finish in Calvi. Simon Gerrans won the stage. Stage 4. July 2, 2013 AA Euro Nice to Nice, 25 km team time trial. The first stage on mainland France was a team time trial, in which each team's time was taken when their fifth rider crosses the line. The race commenced in the Jardin Albert 1 and looped around the streets of Nice until reaching the Promenade des Anglais after 1.5 km. The route then followed the seafront for 6.5 km before turning north at Nice-Quartier d'Azur Airport to follow the Var Valley. The intermediate time check came at 13 km, after which the race turned south and returned via the Promenade des Anglais to the Jardin Albert. American cyclist Ted King, who was nursing a shoulder injury, was controversially eliminated from the Tour after riding on his own using a standard road bike and finishing 7 seconds outside the cut-off time. Many felt that race officials should have taken account of his courage in completing the stage and allowed him to continue the Tour. Stage 5. July 3, 2013 AA Euro-Cannes-sur-Mer to Marseille, 228.5 km. The fifth stage took the riders westwards through Provence, crossing 4 small categorized climbs before reaching the port of Marseille, finishing at Parc Beaurecopi, to the south of the city centre. Mark Cavendish won the stage, which was the 24th Tour de France stage victory of his career. Stage 6. July 4, 2013 AA Euro Aix-en-Provence to Montpellier, 176.5 km. The race continued westwards through southern France into Languedoc. The stage was won by André Greipel in a sprint finish. Stage 7. July 5, 2013 AA Euro Montpellier to Albi, 205.5 km. This stage took the riders northwest through the Monts de Lacorne, including the climbs of the Col des 13 Vents and the Category 2 Col de la Croix de Maunes. After passing the town of Lacorne, the race dropped down over 2 smaller climbs before the finish in the World Heritage Site city of Albi. Peter Sagan won the stage in a sprint finish. Stage 8, July 6, 2013 AA Eurocasters to Axe-3 Domains, 195 km. After 120 km of flat to start, Stage 8 featured the first mountains of the Tour, including the Orcata copyright Gurry climb of the Porte de Pèlerès, which, at 2001 am, is the highest point reached on the 2013 Tour. The first rider to cross the summit, Movistar Team's Nairo Quintana, won the Souvenir Henri Desgrange. The finish was at the Axe-3 Domains ski resort, at 1375 am, with the final climb covering 7.8 km and rising 670 am at an average gradient of 8.6%. The final climb saw the GC contenders come to the front in this Tour's first battle for the Maillot Jaune. Johnny Hougeland attacked as soon as the flag was dropped and was quickly joined by 3 other riders, Jean-Marc Marino, Christophe Riblin, and Rudy Mollard. The group opened a gap of roughly 9 minutes over the flatter 2/3 of the course and crossed through the sprint point at 1:17 km. Back in the peloton, André Greipel took the sprint honours ahead of Peter Sagan and Mark Cavendish. The race soon reached the base of the Porte de Pèlerès, with the leading group only holding an advantage of under 2 minutes. Hougeland attempted to break away from his companions at the 50 km to go mark before being brought back. Riblin then launched an attack of his own and built a sizable lead over his former escape companions. Robert Gesink was the first rider to attack from the peloton and was followed by an attack from Thomas Voeckler. At this point, yellow jersey holder Daryl Impey was dropped. Quintana launched his own attack with 34 km to go. Quickly catching and passing Voeckler, Gesink, and Riblin. Pierre Roland and Igor Antiqueb then attempted to follow, but Quintana built an advantage of 55 seconds over the chasing group at the top of the climb. Roland would catch Quintana on the bottom of the descent, but was quickly dropped as the riders began the ascent up to Axe-3 Domains. Riders were continuously shelled from the back of the chasing group until only 5 riders remained with under 10 km to go, Team Sky riders Chris Froome and Richie Porte, Quintana's teammate Alejandro Valverde, and Team Saxo Tinkoff pairing Alberto Contador and Roman Krujija. Porte and Froome, having built a small gap over the other 3 riders, soon caught Quintana. thus prompting Froome to launch an attack of his own up the mountain. Froome gradually built a larger advantage all the way to the finish line and into the yellow jersey. Behind, Valverde attempted to chase after Froome, before being passed by Porti, who comfortably rode into second place. Contador and Kruijs struggled behind and were passed by Belkin pro cycling duo Borg Mollema and Laurens ten Dam, and Euskaltel-Euskadi's Michael Niv. Stage 9, July 7, 2013 AA Euro St. Girons to Barnarez de Beagle, 168.5 km. The second stage in the Pyrenees saw the race cross the Category 2 Col de Portet d'Aspet, soon after the start, followed by 4 Category 1 climbs, Col de Menta Copyright, Col de Pierresord, Col de Val-Louronaiset, and La Auquec d'Ancizan. This is a roller coaster stage. Following Froome and Team Sky's dominating performance at Axe 3 Domains, Movistar and Garmin attacked from the early stages. Although Chris Froome was able to follow the attacks, Richie Porte's efforts caused him to be dropped by the leaders and eventually lose 10 minutes. As a result, Froome was left isolated for the majority of the stage, having to hold off several attacks from Nairo Quintana on the final climb. A late attack on the final climb by Jacob Fuglsang and Dan Martin was allowed to escape, and the Irish rider held off Fuglsang to win the stage. The rest of the leading riders, minus Porte, finished in a group behind Martin. Stage 10. July 9, 2013 AA Euro St. Gildas des Bois to St. Malo, 197 km. Stage 11. July 10, 2013 AA Euro Aventures to Mont Saint-Michel, 33 km, individual time trial. References